What's up, everybody? My name is Indy, and that gentleman right next to me is Mr. J. Powell from Powell Group Consulting, and welcome to Indie Game Business. I wasn't here last week, but that's okay. I was riding my motorcycle. 1,000-mile ride. It was awesome. But today's special guest, what? Yeah, it was awesome. Well, it was 500 miles both ways, one way. So
okay. I was like, can you even walk?
I mean, my butt was pretty sore, but I got a pretty comfy seat, so that helps. But our special guest today is Michael Brown from Vicarious PR, and we're also live on Discord. So if you want to check that out, discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. Also, I would very much love to thank our sponsor, Tripwire Presents.
Awesome. Welcome back, Dan. We missed you last week when I had to manage all of the production crap myself, and so some of it probably worked and some of it didn't. But welcoming back our good friend Michael Brown, Vicarious PR, who's been with us since day one on Indie Game Business, and we very much appreciate, and who also just cost me a whole bunch of money because he told me I had to update my Powell Group branding that's been around for 12 years now. So I should probably invoice you back for that, honestly.
Well, no, shouldn't I take like a finder's fee, like a commission? Should you pay me, right? That's like top quality consulting advice right there.
Yes, telling me to go spend a lot of money. That's top quality consulting there.
You did it though, right? So you followed the advice. So you thought it was good advice.
Yes,
by your own admission. So
just
billable.
Does that mean that I get a new jar, a new water jar?
No, that's all the Indie Game Business branded stuff that we sent out. I haven't made new. I don't even have the new logo yet, so of course we haven't made it.
Yeah,
I'm excited to see it.
Once you get a new logo, since I've been here since day one, can we get like I was here before it was cool T-shirts?
Wait, is it cool now?
I don't know. Let's pretend it is. It's cool.
I gave Jay some paid advice, and all I got was this stinking.
All I got was this lousy T-shirt. All right, so for the folks who do not know you, tell us how you got into the industry initially, and walk us through what you've done to this point.
Sure. So I'm Michael. I'm the CEO of Vicarious. How did I get into the industry? Well, I was terrible at school, and I left school at 16. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life? I know I'll play video games, and I should probably get paid for it. So I tried to be a journalist for a little bit, and then realized that I couldn't support a family on a journalist wage. And so I went to the dark side and started a PR company, and now I have a PR company and a small publishing label. And so we started out like that. Vicarious, for those of you who don't know, our agency is run by myself and a bunch of other former journalists and content creators. We specialize in three main things: PR, influencer marketing, and advertising. And we take a holistic approach to PR and marketing. So we build campaigns designed around specific games and their genres, and we try to target it holistically rather than doing like traditional, let's write a press release and send it to everybody and hope for the best kind of thing. And so, that's us in a nutshell, really.
All right, so this is the point where I'm going to make you brag, because you and I had like a 2-hour conversation last week at some point, and you mentioned this thing that you all pulled off, but you didn't really talk about it. Tell everybody, on the last Steam Next Fest, how many of the top games came from your work and your clients?
Sure. So, as for a PR person, I'm pretty bad at like promoting myself. But yeah, I mean, for Next Fest, last October Next Fest, of the top 10 wishlisted games that were on the front page of the Next Fest, 8 of them were ours.
Yes. So you kind of know what you're doing.
I've got that particular aspect down to a fine art. Until Valve decide to change the algorithm, then I'm screwed. And it's back to square
one. Everybody gets to figure it out all over again.
Yeah.
So today we're talking about all the things that you have to do to make your game a commercial success. So this is where we always tell people, if you want to make games for an art or for an hobby, you don't have to listen to us. That's a completely different ball game. We wish you the best and have a wonderful time with it. For those of you who want to do this as your job and your career and build a company, you got to think about all of this shit. So from the get-go, what things do you have to keep in mind when you're actually deciding what kind of game you want to make?
I think when you decide on what game you want to make, I think it's important to keep in mind that, like, just because you've got a good idea for a start doesn't make it a sellable idea. Ideas are everybody's got ideas. I could come up with 12 game ideas right now. Doesn't mean any of them would be good. I think you have to carefully look at not what you want to make in that sense, but also look at what's the situation in the market, what games are people buying, what's popular, what's not popular, are there any gaps in things that are popular, is there unique hooks that haven't been done before, and trying to establish, like, first off, is there going to be a big enough audience for my game, right? Because a lot of times, there's a lot of games that are made with very, very niche audiences, and then you kind of get, you don't want to end up in a situation where you build a game, you're excited for it, and then it has no audience. You have to build to your audience. Now, that's not to say that you can't take risks and you can't take creative license and do something new and try and push something different. But I think the core foundation of it has to come from a place of, if you want to achieve commercial success, then build it for commercial success and not just creative vision in that sense, because you have to combine the two. Because too many games, particularly from indies, and to a degree, larger companies as well, but there's so many games that are made very insular in the fact that, a bunch of people get together and think, hey, this will be a great idea for a game, with no forethought of, will people like this? Will people buy this? Is this something people want? And without that conversation, it makes it very difficult to go anywhere from there, because then you spend 3 years in development and launch a game and have never thought once, is this something that people actually want to buy and spend money on?
At this point, are there types of games that nobody wants?
To a degree, I think there are certainly genres that are oversaturated. I mean, and we've all known, we've seen trends come and go. Zombies was a trend. Cyberpunk was a trend. So there's always trends that come and go as well. But I mean, there's also genres that are oversaturated because of the nature of the game. Because obviously, building an XCOM-sized game with turn-based combat and RPG progression is infinitely more complex and more difficult to create than a puzzle platformer, right? And so you're going to get 10 times the amount of puzzle platformers because they're inherently cheaper and easier to make. But the difficulty is that when everybody's making the same kind of game or the same genre, it becomes pointless, because no one's going to buy it unless you're a rare outlier. And the problem is that too many people think they're going to be the outlier rather than trying to build an audience. Everyone thinks they're going to be Limbo, but they're not. And so I think there's always an audience for something, but it comes down to what your intentions are. Like, are you trying to make a games company and be successful? If so, then it's probably it's a question that you have to ask yourself seriously, and like, okay, well, what do I want? How do I build this? What's the audience going to want? What are people buying right now? What do I think people are going to buy in the next couple of years? What's coming out? Do some research. What games are slated for the next couple of years? What themes? What's the mechanics? What's the combat systems like? What's the exploration systems like? And all that kind of thing. And that will help at least inform you of what not to do for the most part.
So where do you start in that level of research? Where do you go to try to get an understanding of what's coming out in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years?
There's lots of things that you can do. I think the best thing to do, and what I like to do, is I like to jump on SteamDB, look at release lists, look at places like Reddit on the game developer subreddit, and look at anywhere indie developers or developers in general are congregating to talk about their games and what they're working on. Spending time on those places gives you a good indication of what people are working on, what ideas are going back and forth, and at least then you can get a sense of what people are working on overall. but also, keeping track of what's successful, like, month to month, and look at, okay, well, these are the top 15 games that sold really well in June. Here's the next month. Here's the next bunch of set of games that sold well. Are there any patterns in there? What are the characteristics of each successful title? Was it a combination of different things? Was it the quality? Was it the execution? And there's a ton of variables, and it's never going to be, I wish there was, but there's never going to be like a list that's like, this is what you should make in 3 years' time and you will make money. It's never going to happen, right? It's an educated guess at best for a lot of the times, and it comes down to a whole bunch of variables, including, quality, execution, theme, idea, all that kind of thing. But it's doing that whole exercise is much better than going in completely blind and going, this idea I had in my bathroom while I was on the toilet one time is going to work, right? Like, you have to put it through its paces and figure out, is this going to be commercially viable, and then go from there. Because if you build it with that intention of like, this is for the audience and not for me, in that sense, it will help you inform design choices in the early stages that will help the game ultimately become more marketable later down the line.
So where in all of this, when you're looking at what's out there right now, what's coming, do you need to be looking at AAA stuff or indie stuff or both? Because there's a huge difference, and then reality fits in there too. You may want to make a Souls-like game, but you're not going to create Elden Ring on a budget of $500,000.
Well, no, but you could, but vice versa, you could create Titan Souls, right? So you could create the indie version of Dark Souls in that sense. I mean, there's stuff that translates regardless of budget, right? Themes translate. Core mechanics can be worked multiple different ways, and implemented and executed differently. So I think it's healthy to look at the industry as a broad view, to look at what's popular, and that way it can inform you of like, hey, people really dig card systems right now. Maybe that's something I should do. Or, hey, I've noticed that nobody's doing turn-based environmental stuff anymore. Like, why is that? Right. And so vice versa, you can look at stuff and notice, hey, everybody's doing this one thing, so maybe I should try something different. Or, maybe I can implement that thing that everybody's doing because it seems to be working really well. I mean, RPG mechanics are a perfect element to this. Like, what was it, 10 years ago, when every game all under the sun suddenly had RPG elements, no matter what it was. Everything has RPG elements now, right? And so that's the same principle, right? Everybody looked at like people like, hey, people really like progression. People really like RPG progression. Let's like implement it into everything. And it worked. Like, people love it, but
So to show how far back that goes, one of my very first clients when I got into the industry, and we're talking like 1999, implemented what made their game stand out was they implemented RPG elements into an RTS. Didn't get that much credit for it. The game was fairly successful, but then Warcraft 3 did it, and everybody was like, holy shit. But it had already been done. So let's say hypothetically, I realize that there's no turn-based environmental games out there, and I'll confess, I don't know what an environmental game is, unless we're like doing turn-based save the whales type stuff. But I start making my turn-based element, environmental game, and about halfway through development, Firaxis announces something similar, or another indie game announces something similar. Do I just like hang it up and start over? How do you adapt? So let me put it this way. What should you be worried about in terms of competitiveness? What should you not be worried about? And then how do you adapt midstream?
This is a question I get asked too often. I think I wouldn't start over. I would just continue doing what you were doing. Like, at that point, I think to a certain degree, it's okay to worry about competitors, but we're at a point in the industry right now where it's never going to return to like, I'm going to have the perfect time to release a game. It's never going to happen again. There's too many games coming out. There's too many people. Like, you're never going to have that one day where you get everything all to yourself and it's all good. It's never going to happen. So at that point, you just have to focus on what you're doing and showcasing that to the best of your ability and not worrying too much about what's going on elsewhere. I think, obviously being first to something always helps, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the success or get the recognition for being first. I mean, I've had many games that have done something and then a big AAA company comes out and announces basically the exact same game 6 months later, and then suddenly we're the ones who are copying, right? Like, it's like, okay, well, we were doing this for a while now. So it's okay to, look at the competitors and look at what they're doing and adjust accordingly. But I think at a certain point, it just makes sense to focus on what you're doing and doing it well. Obviously, take into account what they're doing when their release dates are. You don't want to launch your RPG right when Pathfinder 3 comes out on the same day, because that's just going to be a travesty. But within reason, I wouldn't focus too much on it, because I think you get to a point in development and marketing in general where if you look too much at whatever everybody else is doing, you're not going to be focused on what you're doing, and that you miss things that you could be doing because you're so focused on what everyone else is doing, and you don't, and there's things that you could be doing that ultimately maybe your competitors aren't doing. Maybe they're not focusing on a specific marketing channel, and you could really, hit home there or something like that. But yeah, I mean, there's no perfect time. There's no perfect scenario. So, I think we all need to stop pretending like there is ever going to be a situation like that ever again.
So you brought up marketing channels, and so let's dive into that point. Well, let's actually start before that. While you're building your game, and let's say you've gone through and you've done your market analysis, you understand some of the trends, some of the gameplay mechanics, some of the ways that you can blend stuff. And by blend stuff, it's like you and I have been talking about Midnight Suns. So they basically took XCOM and Slay the Spire and slammed it together and added Wolverine. And now you have, a tactical turn-based strategy that's based on cards. And there's other ones out there too, but that's like the big one that just comes to mind. How do you start planning for your marketing, and mainly in how much money you're going to put into this to get your game out there and be seen?
You should essentially start planning your marketing from day one. I mean, there are things that you can do from the get-go as soon as you announce the game on the social and community side. But you should be planning way ahead. I mean, I think in terms of budgets, I mean, money's always something that people don't like to talk about. I think the reality is it depends on the game. You should be expecting to, you should expect to spend a fair amount on marketing if you want it to sell. Because ultimately marketing isn't about making your game good. It's not about making people think that your game is good. Marketing is all about getting eyeballs on your game so that the consumer can make a choice to purchase or not, right? And so with that in mind, it's all about being able to get the game in front of enough people so that you're playing the numbers, getting it in front of enough people so that you actually start to get conversions and sales and build up an audience. For a small indie game, I would say that you're going to end up, you're going to end up spending anywhere between 25 and 50 grand base minimum. And that's for a small, 1-2 person team with no money, right? I think that's what you should realistically be expecting. It makes no sense to spend $250,000 in development and spend no money on your marketing. It doesn't make sense. There's no other industry in the world that does that other than this one. There's no, if you went to, if you were making food products and you went to Walmart, you said, hey, can you put this on our shelves? We'd like to sell this. And they're like, hey, okay, what are you doing for your marketing? You said, oh, we're not going to do any marketing. We're just going to stick it on the shelf and hope for the best. They will laugh you out of the fucking store.
I had
like,
never thought of it that way, but yeah.
they'll laugh
You're
you out
not
the
even
store.
going to get picked up to be on the shelf.
No. I mean, literally, I've had, but it's less common now. But we still deal in digital, in physical distribution for some games. And one of the big things that the distributors ask you for is the marketing plan. They say, "Hey, how are you going to get people into my store to buy the game?" Right? Because that's what they're not going to do it for you. They're gonna want, their contribution is, "Hey, you get to put it on my shelf, and that costs money. So that's what you get." And how are you going to get people in there, right? Like, how are you going to get people attracted to this game? How are you going to get people through my front doors? And the idea that you're not going to do anything, you're just going to be like, it'll be okay, I find it like insane. It drives me crazy because I've never experienced this in any other industry. No other industry makes a product and then doesn't try and push it to its audience. Like, in the idea that people are like, well, it's a good game, it'll speak for itself. It really won't anymore.
Not
Like, it
anymore.
just won't. Nobody cares. Nobody's sitting there going, "Hey, I'm going to go look through pages and pages of releases on Steam, see if I can find a gem." Like, nobody's doing that. I think it's an insane assertion. And if you look at even like smaller titles, right? Like, I can't remember. I think there was a small gladiator game recently. I can't remember what it was called. I think it was like, We Are About to Die. I think it's that. And if you listen to the developer, he did all of his own marketing himself, right? Now, he didn't. One of the things that, if you listen to him talk about that game, one of the things you'll never hear him say is, "Hey, I made this really good game and I didn't do anything." He worked for like 2 years on marketing to make it happen. And so, it's crazy to assume that you can just spend a ton of money on development and not really invest in marketing. I mean, marketing costs a lot of money, no doubt. And it's one of those things where, for people who don't understand marketing or aren't experienced in it, it is somewhat ethereal sometimes, which it shouldn't be. It's not like you're just going to throw money down. If you know what you're doing, you're not throwing money into the ether and hoping for something, right? That there's a process and there's a way to do it properly. But yeah.
All right, so we've got 2 questions back to back from the audience. So first one from Discord: what would you say is an okay ratio for marketing to development spend? And that is how we've always thought about it in the past. But the follow on to that is, or should you just plan on spending, for an indie game, 25 to 50 grand, regardless of the budget?
You can do it ratio. I would do like 50%, just to be safe. I mean, I would say 40 to 50% is probably going to be good for that. I mean, it really does depend on the genre in the game and the audience size, right? Like, you let's say you spend $250,000 on development. I would put 100 grand towards that minimum. That's an expensive game.
Yeah.
And like, the more money that you put towards marketing, think of it like this: the more money you put towards marketing, the more opportunities that you give yourself to be able to hit that right audience that you need. I would also consider that the more you also have to factor in that, like, hey, maybe I should hire somebody for this, whether it's a PR agency, whether it's an ads agency, whether it's an internal hire, whatever. But having someone who knows what they're doing is key to making your money go further, right? Because you want ultimately every dollar that you spend in marketing to give a return for you. And so you have to spend it wisely. But I mean, yeah, I would say half of the money that you spend in development should go, like, equivalent to half should go to marketing, because otherwise you're really limiting. I mean, you're cutting your feet from under you straight away without investing in your marketing properly. I mean, it's an odd conversation to have, and it's something. I mean, me and you have talked about this many times, but it's an odd conversation that I find it to be almost like out of body experience when people say to me, like, "Hey, I made this game and I want people to buy it, but I don't market it." It's just the strangest thing.
All right, so the follow-on question from Twitch it's like Darren says, you're saying getting visibility by spending money, but for me as a game developer, I don't know where to put that money to get visibility. And this is like one of the biggest things that we always see. So how? Where?
Okay, well, let's break it down. Right. So you've got multiple marketing channels, right? So you've got press, like traditional media, websites. You have influencers, YouTubers, Twitch streamers. You've got social media, as in like we'll make content and we'll post content on social media, etc., etc. You've got social media advertising or digital advertising in general across the board. And so those are kind of your main channels. Now there's additional items like, you know, press kits, physical goods, giveaways, all that kind of thing. But let's go with those 4 for now. So if you look at that across the board, you go look at your game. So what you first want to do when you're deciding on where to spend your money, look at the game, right? Because the game, if you're careful, if you look at and assess your audience, that's going to inform you onto where you want to spend money, right? So if I take, for example, let's say any given game and go, okay, what's the genre? Okay, so I know what the genre is. I know what we're trying to do. What's my audience? Who are my audience? Well, my audience are RPG, people who like RPGs, let's say. So, okay, people who like RPGs. So what do they look like? Do some audience research. Go, okay, well, most people who play RPGs, they're, 20 to 40, let's say, on average. They skew slightly more male, but it's probably maybe like a 55-45 split. So where do they go for their content? And try and look at different elements. So, for example, if my audience, let's say, is like skews older, and I know that people who play, like, perfect example of this is like, let's say I'm making like a really old school CRPG that's inspired by the original Baldur's Gate, and it's got real-time combat, which most people don't like anymore, and I'm doing it like a really old school vibe, right? I know that a 17-year-old who loves Call of Duty ain't going to play that. So I'm going to be skewing to people who are, 30 or older, more likely 35 and older, people who played like CRPGs in the 90s. So where are they going to be? Well, I can guarantee you they're probably not going to be on Snapchat. So that's probably out straight out of the get-go, right? So what social platforms are they going to be in? Well, more than likely they're going to be probably Facebook and Reddit, right? Because that's where old farts like me hang out, right? Maybe they'll be on TikTok, maybe, but most likely those are your 2 best platforms. So I know that's where slightly older audience hangs out. So then that cuts out. It's a process of elimination that cuts out a bunch of social media platforms that you're not. There's no 45-year-old male gamer who's got maybe 2 hours to game. He's not on Instagram at night, right? He's not sitting there scrolling through Instagram. He's just not doing it. So you can eliminate a bunch of different things just based on thinking about who your audience is. And then based on that, then comes the process of going, okay, well, now I know I want to market on Facebook and I want to market on Reddit and maybe I want to market on YouTube. I want to, PC gamer is going to be perfect because people who like reading articles, they're going to be my audience. So I know I need to do press. I'm probably going to skip Twitch ads because I don't know if they're going to be on Twitch or not. It's that kind of thing. So then you can eliminate your channels, and then what you've got left is the things that you're going to think will work, and then you can start testing that out from that point, right? And that's the better way to do it, because then what you don't want to do is go the other way around and go, let's spend money on everything and then take away, right? Come up with a theory of who your audience is, where they go, and then test it out. And then you can optimize from that point. That's the better way to do it. It's all about thinking, you've got to put yourselves in the shoes of the consumer. It's all about getting in their head and thinking about where are they going to learn about their games, right? And doing that process is going to be much better than throwing 15 grand on Twitter ads and going, why didn't I get anything from that? Well, because they're not there. That's why.
All right. So, and bear with us because we've got so many questions coming in.
Bring them
so fast. Yes. All right, so Gamer Composer, we'll get to. Let me flag you. So all right, so Swarm Creations from Discord, it says, could you break down what that $100,000 would go to?
It can vary, to be honest with you. I mean, it depends on the game. You can't. I hate to say this, and I know this sounds like a really easy way out. You cannot just have like a template campaign and then just follow that template. There's no template that works, right? What worked for one game is not going to work for the other. The way, depending on the game, you could siphon it out to 3 months worth of PR agency work, so press, influencer outreach, maybe do X number of let's do a hypothetical so I can give you a full breakdown. So let's say, Jay, give me a game. Give me a genre.
Turn-based strategy.
Turn-based strategy. All right. So you've got turn-based strategy launching, let's say August of 23. All right. So, and it's an indie game, so the scope is not AAA scope. So I would recommend doing 3 months of PR, 3 months run up of press and organic influence outreach. That's probably going to set you back about 25K. After that, maybe doing 20 to 30 grand worth of paid influencers. And before everybody attacks me about paid influencers are very, very useful and very, very effective when done correctly. The way to do paid influencers correctly is to make sure that you're actually targeting the right influencers and not just spending money on any influencers like a lot of people do. A Call of Duty influencer is not going to want to play a turn-based strategy. And his audience is not going to give a shit about a turn-based strategy, so it's probably not worth spending $5,000 on that guy. There's really good ways to do it, and there's also creative ways to do it. Whether it's like Total War did a really good thing years ago with Three Kingdoms, where they got a history YouTuber who does like oversimplified breakdowns of historical events with cartoons, and they had one done for the Three Kingdoms so people understood what time period the game was set in. Like, you can do it creatively like that as well.
Is that extra credit?
No, it wasn't. It was another. It was oversimplified, or I can't remember. I think it's called oversimplified. I can't remember. But there's creative ways to do that as well. So yeah, so you've got 25K. So let's say 25K on that, and then 30K. So 25K on PR. Then you've got 30K, give or take, on paid influencers. Maybe you want to do some stuff on ads for specific marketing channels, like let's say Reddit, YouTube, that kind of thing. Maybe you want to push your trailer out. So maybe you want to do, another 30, 25, 30 spend on there, and then give yourself some wiggle room with whatever's remaining to do some fun, cool stuff, whether it be, to double down on stuff that does work. So for example, let's say you want to do like a physical press kit. We did something recently where we had a game that had, we did a fantasy game, and to get interest in the game, we bought we went down to Five Below and bought like these little kids crystals toys as part of a wand. It was part of a wand, and we pulled the crystals off the wand, threw the wand away, and then we ended up with this little crystal. And what we did, we filled it in with a game key slip and then sealed it up and made it look nice. And then we sent it to a bunch of influencers, and the game got covered everywhere. So there's little things you can do like that, but leaving a little bit of room. But yeah, that's kind of the breakdown of what I would spend that on. And then at least then like you've got a little bit of remainder, so you can reinforce stuff that does work. And then on top of that, you're not worrying about, like, for example, with ads, if the ads aren't performing well, you can just cut them off straight away and then increase your budget and then double down on paid influencers, let's say, because paid influencers might be giving you like a shit ton of traffic and wish lists. So let's do more of that, right? So you can be flexible with it. So yeah, that's the way I would do it, if that helps.
All right. So if you're talking about that 3 months of marketing, and then it's like, when do you start? Are you talking like 3 months from the time the game's going to launch, or 3 months in the middle, or at what point do you go, okay, I need to start marketing this?
It depends. I mean, the sooner that you start, the better. It also depends on your budget, the game, the targets, your goals, all that kind of thing. Like some smaller indie games, I would recommend a minimum of 3 months right before the game launches, so you can do like an announcement, a run up, and then hit into launch. So you've got that momentum spilling into the launch. And for larger games, especially for games that have a lot of systems or have a larger audience, maybe you want to do 6 months. Oftentimes, I always recommend, depending on how you want to do it, I always recommend doing like a block right before the launch. So you've got a couple of months to build momentum right before the main launch. But maybe you want to do like a couple of months, 6 months in advance or 12 months in advance for the initial announcement. Or you want to like do specific activations dotted around in the year build up to do like an announcement, a couple of events, and then do like a big block for the launch. There's lots of ways to do it. There's no like one size fits all. It really depends on the game and the goals and everything like that. But you always want to do at least, you always want to do a sizable campaign pre-launch, because once your launch is done, it's done. And there's stuff that you can do. There's tons of stuff you can do post-launch, but you only get one launch, so you're going to make it count. So making sure that you do plenty pre-launch and getting eyeballs on it is absolutely critical. And that, there's always exceptions to the rule, and bear in mind there's always going to be exceptions to the rule on everything that we talk about today. But you can't base your success on trying to be the exception to the rule, because that's just bad business.
All right. So if an indie game studio or two people don't have $20,000 for marketing, does that mean that the game isn't worth it to be marketed by a PR company? Indies barely have enough money for development, so how do they apply for marketing funds somewhere?
That's a good question. I don't think it doesn't mean that if the developers don't have money, it doesn't mean the game isn't worth anything. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't, as a PR company, I wouldn't want to, but I also have to pay the bills, so I can't do things for free, right? It doesn't mean it's not to do with worth, right? I mean, there's lots of games, for example, that come across my table that have tons of money, and I say no to, because I don't think the game's good. I don't think it's got what it takes. I don't think it's going to be. I don't think the quality's there, and vice versa. There's games that come across my table that I think that the indie developer's like, hey, I don't have any money. Can we do a rev share? Which we don't do. And he's like, I don't have any money. And I look at the game and I think, God, if I had $500,000, I'd have made that a smash hit. Like, there's all kinds of situations, and it's and don't get me wrong, I understand that, especially if you're an indie, it can be real tough and real disheartening to look at the budgets of some games and go, I would never have that kind of money to spend on marketing. There are things that you can do in terms of on your own. In terms of applying for funds, there's quite a few companies that do provide funding for stuff, depending on where you're at in development and that kind of thing. So you can definitely apply for funds. You can apply for grants, depending, and obviously there's different countries also have like regional stuff as well. Like I always get jealous. I always feel jealous for Canadian developers because of the Canada Media Fund, because they just get like all kinds of money for stuff.
Millions. Yes.
And it's like and devs from other countries don't get anything like that kind of support. But there's definitely resources that you can use. I know you guys have got like a bunch of like resources.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've got a client that does exactly that. And just if you're interested, DM me somewhere, email me, DM me on Discord, Twitter, whatever. But we have a client that specifically, they're an investment client. They invest in the marketing or the porting of games that they feel are going to be successful, but they don't have the money to do the marketing. And so, it's not like a grant, it's an investor. So they're going to want a return on that. But I mean, we are on the consulting side actively looking for games that are 6 months out from launch that need anywhere from, 100 to 500 grand for marketing. And so, yeah, there are avenues for it. But you got to dig. There's not a ton of them. You got to dig around, and a lot of it is country-based stuff. But I know of at least probably half a dozen investment firms that do that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and if if you're ever concerned about like trying to find stuff like that or trying to get advice on what you should do and what path you should take, myself included, and ask a PR company, ask a consulting firm, ask somebody who knows what they're talking about, and more often than not, they're happy to give you like really good free initial advice and set you on a path to at least where you'll be able to find out more information about different stuff. So don't be afraid to ask people what to do and that kind of thing, because especially if you don't know where to start even looking, it's worth having that conversation with somebody.
All right. What Dan just posted in Discord, we are maxed out on questions for right now. So if we were more indie size, you do 25K in dev cost and 10K in marketing, or does it not scale properly on that side of the?
No, the smaller you get, I mean, think of it like this, right? It's the same principle with like ad spend. Spending 5K in ads is not going to go anywhere. It's like a drop in the ocean, so to speak. You have to spend you have to have a sizable enough budget where you're going to hit the point where you've got enough eyeballs on it in that sense. Otherwise, you're just never going to get a return in that way. So, even if your game only costs, 30,000 to make, doing a budget of like 10K is probably not going to get you much of anywhere. I would always recommend going higher, but again, it really depends. It does depend on your goals and what you're looking to achieve and what you view as commercial success, right? Because there are things that that play into that. But no, I mean, I would say like a minimum, like the bare minimum of like a decent budget, especially for like a really small game that you just want to sell a bunch of copies, is probably going to be around the 25-30K mark minimum.
And keep in mind too, we're talking about commercial success. We're not talking about everybody's going home rich and buying a G6 plane. I mean, so your bar to hit commercial success on a game that's costing you 30 grand and another 25-30 grand in marketing is much lower than somebody whose budget just for the game itself is $250,000. So Jean Valjean can love that. Big Lemoness fan. How much would you have to make and how many units would you have to sell to be considered commercially successful?
Well, that depends on what your break-even point is, I suppose.
Oh wait, Dan, put the part 2 back up there. I didn't see that part. Oh wait, we'll get to that in a second. So how much is commercially successful?
Well, I mean, commercially successful. I mean, it's different for everybody, right? Like if I make a game that costs me 30 grand and I only need to sell, 5,000 copies to be into profit, then I'm commercially successful once I'm into profit, right? Basically, for the most part. If you're looking for like a more wider spread version of commercially successful in terms of, hey, we broke even and sold a lot more copies on top of that and have the critical acclaim and all that kind of thing. Again, it depends on the game. I would say that like if you can sell enough copies to where not only have you broken even and not only have you made profit, but you're well into making ×2 profit, ×2 return on the investment you made in development and marketing, and then you can start funding your next game. I think that's fairly commercially successful. But it depends, right? I mean, commercially successful for you internally might not mean commercially successful public perception-wise, right? Like, if you're looking for commercially successful from public perception, then obviously selling tens, if not hundreds of thousands of copies is probably more the way that you want to go on that side. I mean, we've had a couple of what you would say is commercially successful from a public opinion standpoint recently, and they sold. I would say anything over. If you get to the point where you're selling over 75,000 copies and you're well on your way to 100K or more, you're at that point you would be considered commercially successful by everybody, regardless of if you made money back or not yet. So yeah, I mean it's a variable definition depending on what your own
literally, as long as you made your money back, and someone just pointed out on Reddit, assuming you're accounting for your own wage in there, if you've worked on your own on the nights and weekends for 3 years on a game and spent $15,000 on contractors, that does not mean your budget is $15,000. You've got to factor in all of that time you spent there. But yeah, at the bare minimum, if you made a profit, but realistically, you need to make a profit and have enough left over to fund your next game that you want to do, so you don't run out of money.
Yeah. Time frame is also important as well. Like, I wouldn't, if it takes 3 years to make it to break even, it's probably
that's true too.
Not commercially. I mean, but again, it's one of those things that's a moving goalpost, because, for example, if take a AAA game, right? If AAA game sells like 3 million copies first month, you would view that as commercially successful. But the question is, did they make their money back?
Yeah.
Right? That's the question. Because if they didn't, then technically it's not. But by any outside appearance, it is commercially successful, right? So it really comes down to the internal metrics mixed with the perception. But I mean, I think, if you spent $250,000 on a game and you spend another $100K or so on marketing, and you sell, let's say you launch on Steam or whatever platform, and you sell let's say 90,000 copies within the first month, then you're commercially successful, because your tail end of that is going to be real strong.
I'd like to chime in just for a second. I don't know why anybody would want to start like, hey guys, let's make a game. Let's spend all of these weekends and nights working our butt off all together for free to make a game, and then we have no idea. Oh, are we going to market it? I don't know. I didn't think about that. All of this stuff that you got to figure out, and then you got to put it on a marketplace and hope people buy it. I have no idea why anybody would want to do that.
But that's the reason we do these shows, because that is a huge
right. It's
perception
like people
problem.
are so passionate about that, and I'm like, I mean, I made a game, right, and it did amazing. Not really, it did terrible. But I made a game, and I was miserable. That's not for me. But it's like people are just so passionate about it, right? And just learning it. And I just find that amazing. Anyways, I just wanted to chime in.
All right, so pop the second part of that last question up here, because this is important, because it's just to prove that there are no guarantees. I mean, full disclosure, my first company was a production firm, and we did contract development, and then we started doing original development after that. Our first game did really well. Our next two failed catastrophically, and hence I started a consulting firm. Just because you know all this, and Michael spoke to this at one of our conferences, you can still do everything right and fail. I mean, I knew this business when I did that. We still didn't, turn out the money. All right. So that last question, Dan, what was that? All right. So what you're seeing, how often do games that give their best effort with their marketing actually obtain that goal?
That's a complicated question. I can only speak from my experience. I mean, I've had games that have not sold as well as I'd have liked to. It happens, right? There's no guarantees. There's no, you can do the best marketing campaign. You can make a really good game, and it just flops. And sometimes that happens. I mean, it's rare. It's not 100. I mean, it's not like guaranteed that it's going to happen a lot, but it does happen. I mean, all you have to do is look at, just look at Cliffy B's games. The last two he made. I mean, that first person shooter one with the no gravity thing. I mean, that had millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars spent in development and marketing, and nobody cared about it. Instantly. I think ultimately it comes down to execution. Like with game development, the execution of design is critical to the success of anything, and the same applies with marketing. You can have a really good plan, but with poor execution, that really good plan's not going to go anywhere. So it's important to make sure that the people who are executing the marketing plan know what they're doing and know how to do it. And so, it's one of those things where there's no guarantees in the success, but I think the chances of success, or at least getting to a point where you're not in the hole for hundreds of thousands of dollars, is increased exponentially when executed correctly. Because ultimately, there are, if you've got an audience, the game's good, the game appeals to that audience. Even if you don't get those sales all at once at this very start, at least there's the opportunity over the game's life cycle to be able to sell the copies that you need to sell to make it back. But yeah, I mean, the idea is that it all goes well and it hits the targets that it wants to. And more often than not, that happens. But I mean, I say that from my experience, but that's also because we choose our games pretty carefully. So it's a little bit of a cheat that way, I suppose.
And sometimes the universe just shits on you. I mean, let's say hypothetically you were putting out a D&D based combat game in the last 2 weeks, or even the next 2 weeks after this. The higher up company completely shot themselves in the foot, and there's nothing that you can do to influence that. But all of a sudden, you're releasing a D&D game as an indie dev, and banned D&D is like trending on Twitter. And so we had it happen years ago when I worked with the publishing firm. We put out a wonderful downhill skiing game right at the time of the Olympics. All of that stuff should have been tracked out. We based it on Bodie Miller, who was the big skier at that time. And then all the news came out about how he basically skied drunk and all this bad press around him, and the game just died. Nothing we could do about it. I mean, that shit does happen.
I mean, vice versa. I mean, you look at something like Among Us, right? It's a perfect example of this. Like Among Us, when they marketed their initial launch, nobody cared, right? And then they were well into development on their second game when suddenly the game got picked up, a year or two later by a bunch of Twitch streamers, and then suddenly it's the most popular game on on the internet for like 6 months, right? And that just goes to show you that sometimes good games, things happen, right? And it doesn't mean that the game, just because your launch isn't what you want it to be, doesn't mean that the game's over. In that sense, there's stuff that you can do post-launch and that can be done marketing-wise post-launch that can really do stuff, especially if you've got like a good, solid post-launch content plan for updates and things like that. Yeah, Lawbreakers, that's what it was called. Yeah, Lawbreakers.
All right, Dave, what we got next? How do you know when a product is not good enough and not worth spending any more budget into marketing?
That's an interesting question, because it kind of, in my job, it's a little bit art mixed with science. In other people's jobs, it's more science than art. It depends on what stage it is. So if the stage is like pre-launch and it's still conceptual, or like, that kind of thing, I've kind of been able to start developing a really good feel of like, this isn't going to turn out well because I don't see, for what you're making and where this game is, it's not quite matching right now. Post-launch, I think you just have to have an honest and objective look at your numbers and go, okay, well, how much am I spending in marketing? What's my return looking like? What's my traffic? What's my wish list? What's my conversion rate? What's my cost per click? Has it improved at any stage over time? Like, okay, I'm 2 months past launch. I've spent 2 months worth of ads or whatever, and it's not improved. Even though I've made changes and tried to optimize and done all these things, it's not improved. At that point, I'd look at it and go, if there's no like sign of life anywhere and there's no hope at the end of the tunnel kind of thing, where you're just in a situation where, oh, maybe I just haven't optimized it or quite nailed it yet, then I think you have to have an honest look and say, this is, it's not going to work. And that conversation sucks. And it especially sucks when it's something you've created yourself, because you never want to be like, I made something that failed. But look at it like this. There's a ton of ways that you can learn a bunch of lessons from even failure. I mean, look, PR companies like mine, and marketing companies like mine, we always promote our successes, right? But we've had failures too, and we learn from those failures, and that's ultimately what makes good games. is learning from your failures, and it's the same with marketers. What makes good marketers is not the successes don't count as much as the losses, because the losses are the ones where you really learn the lessons of like, I should not do that again, or I could do that better, or I should make sure I should do this next time. And so, you know, it sucks, but there's things that could be valuable that come out of failure, but it does suck when it happens. I mean, there's nothing worse, especially when, you know, I've had conversations with developers over the years where I know that, you know, this guy has put his house on the line for this game, and it didn't, and people didn't like it, and didn't sell, and it's like it's a heart-wrenching conversation. But yeah, it happens.
All right. So how much time do you have? Because I know we're
just keep them coming. We're all good.
All right.
It's
Excellent.
Friday.
Dan, fire the next
so...
one. With marketing, how much of a budget should go into making your own website or hiring a web designer? Part of which, would it be wise to have Twitch and YouTube integration in the website for any influencers that might play test the game?
What was the first part?
Is it worth? Dan is like on the damn ball.
Making your own website. I always recommend making a website. I mean, it doesn't hurt. I mean, it's nice to have somewhere where, you know, if you search for the game on Google, it pops up and there's a place where you can get information about the game. The key for a good website is you don't have to make it too fancy at all. I always recommend, honestly, like, to be honest with you, unless your game is like heavily tailored towards Twitch and influencers, like it's one of those games where it's what's that? Fall Guys. It's like Fall Guys-esque, where it's kind of the success depends upon this game going viral with influencers. I wouldn't bother. Like, I think for me, what makes a good website and what's important about a website is having a visual look that's nice and appealing, so that it sends a good first impression. It has links to a press kit. It has links to contact information. And that's it. Like, you don't really need much else. If you want to do something fancy that makes sense for the game that you're making, then cool, like, be my guest. But I don't see any reason outside of that very specific instance where it makes a ton of sense to invest a shit ton of money into a website. Like, what's the point? Just go on Squarespace and make it for like $40. Like,
well, or Xola. Xola's got a toolkit that you can just go on and build it. I mean, so you don't have to spend a ton of money, and you don't need something ridiculously fancy, but you do need a presence. And, you know, it also goes along with, like, one of my biggest pet peeves. If you have a website and you have a URL, you also have an email address. Stop sending business emails from a Gmail address, you know. So, but there are cheaper ways to do it. But
yeah, I mean, unless you're doing something really fancy with because the game requires it or whatever, I would go really cheap, but just make sure it's done well. Because the website's sole intention is not, to be honest with you, the website's sole intention is not really to attract players. The website's sole intention is so that press and influencers know how to contact you and know how to find more information about the game. Because what you don't want is like, say, you know, you don't want Andy at PC Gamer Googling your game and not being able to find you. Because it
establishes legitimacy.
Yeah, because it does establishes the legitimacy, but it's also it could be the difference between someone covering your game and not. Because press and influencers do not have time to go searching through pages and pages of websites or, you know, social media pages to try and find contact information. They'll look, and if they can't find it within, let's say, like, you know, 30 seconds, they're out. That's all you got.
And that goes true for publishers as well, because that's why they hire teams like mine to do their scouting, is because a lot of times tracking down the teams is like the hardest part of it. And it's like, there's nothing more frustrating than some developer saying, hey, look, we need a publisher, and then you can't find how to actually get in touch with them. So
I know I can't describe the frustration I sometimes feel when I see a really cool game on Steam and I can't find any contact information about the developer, because all I want to do is tell them how excited I am for their game, and let's have a conversation about how we can make it really big, because it's got tons of potential. And they've got no website, no social media, no email address. It's like, oh God. But there you go.
All right, what's next? All right, so Tim from Discord says, "Can you expand more on that? The tons of stuff you can do after launch."
What you're trying? Don't call me out on my vagueness. That's just unacceptable. What is that? You don't put me on the spot like that. Now I've got to come up with ideas and back up what I said. Yeah, I mean, depending on the game, you can do. I mean, obviously, a lot of games do post-launch content plans now, so you can do PR centered around like major updates, that kind of thing. You can also do influencer waves. So we do post-launch influencer waves, especially for games that maybe didn't reach the potential of like have the biggest launch that they could ever have. Like we've had clients, for example, indie clients, that they went to launch their game, didn't really have any money for marketing, so they did it all themselves, didn't really achieve what they could have achieved, but got enough sales to then reinvest that money into marketing, right? So we went back and did influencer pushes, outreach into influencers, sometimes coupled with a content update, sometimes not. You can do PR beats, stuff like interviews, stuff like maybe we want to do bylines where you explain about, like, you tell the story of the studio, like how, two guys in a garage went from that to now a semi decent flat because of the game, all that kind of thing.
That's your objective, to get to a semi decent flat.
Yeah, I mean, you could do advertising pushes. So we've done stuff where I did one recently where there were, a game had launched and it was pretty successful for its most part, but the advertising wasn't done particularly well, and so they want you to look at redoing the advertising to hit the target audience because they feel like they missed the mark on the digital advertising side. And so you can do that kind of thing, because you have to remember, like, your launch, there's no time limit on sales, right? Like, your launch isn't like everyone's going to buy it or it's never going to sell, right? That's not how that works anymore, particularly with PC gaming, right? Just look at the Steam replay this year. How many people bought new games? How many played new games? Versus how many people bought and played a game that was a year or older, right? Like, it's a big number that most, like, I think it was like over 90% of people were playing games that were a year or more older versus new releases. And so you have to factor that into your marketing and go like, oh, so what you're saying is, if I launch in August 23, in August 24, when that rolls around and it's the Steam sale, that could be a really big sale for me. And so maybe you want to do a push for that. Maybe you want to do a push for that, an advertising push, try and spend some money to get it into a point where you've got a lot more sales coming in consistently. And again, with advertising, it's like anything, it's about ROI. So if I'm getting a sale, for every $2 I spend, I get one sale, and that sale is worth $8 to me, then there's really strong ROI on that, right? So there's all kinds of things you could do. I mean, and you could go even more creative than that as well. Like, you can do, fun, weird stuff with plushies and all that kind of stuff. But, it really depends. Again, it comes down to
it's easier now that we've got to, in some ways it's harder, in some ways it's easier now that we've got to a point where games aren't just like fire and forget anymore. There's ongoing post-launch content, there's DLCs, there's all kinds of stuff that can be done. And all of that gives you ways in which to market stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton. But I mean, and there's also, game-specific stuff that you can do depending on, the game as well.
All right. Dan's got to roll soon, so pop the next two-part question up there, and then I'll take care of the questions from here. In comparison to net direct marketing, how valuable is network and word of mouth? This is actually literally the discussion we're having on the Discord right now. If you do not have enough funding or a publisher doesn't have enough marketing budget, can an industry network and an influencer network make up for it?
That's a good question. First off, if a publisher doesn't have enough marketing budget, they're not a good publisher for a start. I'd be worried about that. There's certainly word of mouth can take you a certain ways, right? But it all comes down to scalability ultimately, because if you have 10 people saying your game's really good, how scalable is that long term? it's tough. The same goes with like influencer network. Organic influencers can be super powerful, but there's a lot of variables within word of mouth, and ultimately, like anything, it has to reach a crescendo of enough people have heard about it to then start rolling. It's the snowball rolling down a mountain kind of thing. You've got to be able to get enough momentum in that to be able to build up, because if it just stops somewhere flat, then it doesn't go anywhere. So it's tough to be able to rely solely on word of mouth, and networking is a great tool, don't get me wrong, and it can sometimes create something that's make or break in that sense, but it's tough to network yourself, and only yourself sometimes, because obviously you're dealing with a lot of competition that are also trying to claw for attention at any one time. So it's valuable, certainly, but it's one of those things where I wouldn't count on it in any sense of the word. And I think, obviously, for a developer for an indie developer that has nothing, let's say you've got nothing, you've got no resources available, then you've just got to use what you got, right? You just got to go out there, talk about your game to people, and tell people about it, and that's all you can do. And and cool, I've done that myself many times for people. Like, it's tough, it's rough, but there's no disrespect there. Like, it's a tough thing to do, and it's a tough sell, and for the people who do it and succeed doing it, then all power to you. But it's one of those things that it would not be my preferred choice, let's put it that way.
All right, so for some reason we are actually almost through all the questions, and I didn't even get to the ones on mine, but we may hit some of these too. The next one coming from Discord: what gets more games sold, games on sale or newly released games?
It depends, honestly. I mean, sometimes games have sold more at launch than they have on sale. Sometimes games have sold more on sale than they have at launch. I mean, it's quite variable. It depends on how popular the game is, really. I mean, the more popular the game, the more likely it is that they're going to sell well first, at launch, or at least, and it depends what you define by launch. I mean, I usually define launches in like the first 1 to 3 months, let's say. I mean, because that's how I do my budget estimations and my my forecast. But I mean, tends to be that more popular games will sell better at launch, and then they'll still sell well. But you're talking about a whole different bunch of variables depending on how popular the game is. I've had games that have sold moderately well at launch, and then have went on to have like a massive sale in like the winter sale because they've did a huge discount. And then, for example, one of the campaigns that we did a couple of years ago, a game launched, sold okay, wasn't massive or anything like that. And then we waited to the following Steam sale was the Steam Winter Sale. We put the game on a large discount and coordinated a influencer outreach program where we got a whole bunch of influencers to cover the game right at the start of the sale, and we ended up selling double the numbers from what we did from launch in that Steam sale because of the awareness coupled with the discount. So it can really vary. It just depends on what happens.
Is there a magic number on the discount that you need to shoot for?
There's no magic number. So for a launch discount, I always do 10 to 15%, no more than that. For a Steam sale, it depends on where the game is in its life cycle. I always like to go in thirds, kind of. So for the first sale, I always like to do like a 30%, 33% discount. And then for the following sale, maybe go 50. And then once the game's like a year or two old, I usually do like a 75, 80% discount. But you can play around with it and see what works best. It also depends on the price of the game, as well as like, because I consider the price of the game and what the money's going to be after the sale, and I also consider like the current wish list count and the popularity as well. So if for example, I know my game converts really, really well at like 50% consistently, I probably wouldn't do an 80% sale. I would just kind of keep it around the 50-60% until it got to the point where the numbers weren't, people weren't buying it anymore, and then I would up it.
All right, so let's do Next Fest and wish list. So you had 8 of the top 10 wish listed games you were a factor in on the Next Fest. So what are your top tips for approaching Next Fest, what to do in it, how to move up that ladder?
Sure. So the way that we do our Next Fest campaigns, we start our Next Fest campaigns almost like 6 weeks before Next Fest. The way that the algorithm works right now, as far as I understand it, is that your placement in the Next Fest is determined by the weeks leading up to the Next Fest in terms of traffic and wish lists. So the more wish lists and traffic that you get in the few weeks right before the Next Fest will determine your placement in that. So what we do is we run campaigns where we do outreach campaigns right up until, so we have influencers, for example, because what a lot of people are doing with Next Fest, they're like, okay, we're doing a bunch of events during Next Fest. And it's like, well, okay, so is everybody else. So you're all competing at the same time. Whereas what we're doing, we're having influencers and large influencers play the game the week before or the 2 weeks before. And so we're getting huge spikes in wish lists of traffic right before. And then so the Next Fest comes around, the algorithm kicks in, and it's going, oh, this game achieved like 50,000 wish lists in 6 weeks right before us. You're going on the front page because this is really popular, right? And so that's how we do it. And so it's almost like we're treating it almost like a launch, like a game launch, where you're building momentum up in the weeks building up. And then you're obviously still doing stuff on the week, but you're doing a bunch of stuff to build up momentum, and then having the Next Fest as the crescendo rather than the start and middle and end.
So in many ways, by the time Next Fest actually happens, you're too late.
Yeah.
All right. So wish list, and this was a question on Twitter this week from Jason De La Roca. All things being equal, is there a number of wish lists that's impressive when you're considering a game pitch? Is 10K wish list the impressive benchmark, or does it need to be more? So for the sake of, rankings on Steam, or for the developers that are out there trying to pitch to publishers and find it, is there a magic number for wish lists? And if not, what is factoring into all of that?
There's no magic number. I mean, the more wish lists they have, the more impressive it is, obviously. I think for me, anything, if you're able, let's say, are we talking about with no marketing or with marketing?
We have to assume with marketing. I mean,
well, okay. Well, let's say,
how are you going to get 50,000 wish lists without having any sort of marketing?
I've seen it happen.
Really? And that's like, I mean, when we're talking about marketing, we're not just talking about things that are going into, money being spent on marketing. We're talking about developers going in and posting about their shit on Reddit or Twitter, because that's still marketing.
I mean, I think for me, bearing in mind, you've got to look at the numbers, right? So if you have, I think it's like 10,000 wish lists. If you have like 10,000 wish lists or more, that puts you in like the top, like 10% of games on Steam, which is insane. When that's how many games are on Steam. Think about that.
Well, yeah, that's true too.
I think from a starting point, if a developer comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to do marketing. We haven't really done much. We've done some, small stuff here and there and that kind of thing." If they come to me with more than 10K wish lists, then it's a better, at least somewhat better of a situation than coming and saying, "Hey, I've done a bunch of marketing stuff and I've only got 800."
Well, yeah, no, I agree there. There's a ratio involved.
But, I think I view numbers as simple as this, right? I mean, wish list is a great metric. It's not the be all and end all, though. I track wish lists very carefully because it's a really great tool for me to be able to quantify the success of our work, because I can look at the line go up when I did something, and I go, yay. Do I think that inherently, though, is the thing that's going to be defining? No, I don't. I mean, I've seen games that have 100,000 wish lists and they've sold nothing. Because wish lists are inherently, they're not equal. There's quality to be involved. Quantity is not everything. There's quality. That I've seen games where they've had tens and tens of thousands of wish lists. Told me, I had one developer tell me, I don't need you. I have a bunch of these wish lists. And I said, okay, good luck. And then they went and it was vindication because they didn't sell anything. And that's not, to say that I wanted that to happen, but they were quite rude. And so, but wish list number by and of itself is not inherently a good indicator of what's going to happen, because there's you can get a lot of wish lists and not have enough quality wish lists to turn conversion into something. And you also have to bear in mind that the average Steam conversion rate on wish lists is only around like 7 to 10%, I think. And so if you have 100,000 wish lists or 150,000 wish lists, 7% of 100,000 is not all that much. And so, trying to estimate your sales based on wish lists alone is kind of an odd business to do. So, I mean, obviously, the more wish lists the game has, it's a nice indicator of popularity. It's a nice indication of interest. It is not an indication. I don't take it as an indication, however, of sales or success in that sense. There's more that goes into it than just that.
Is there a way for developers to get a barometer of anything on wish list if it's not their own game and they're not looking at the Steam dashboard?
In what way?
Well, it's like if I want to go and say, okay, here are these games that are in the same genre as mine, is there a way to see how many wish lists or even estimate how many wish lists a game has if you're not the person?
I don't think so. Not at least not accurately. What I usually do is I usually go on SteamDB and look at the followers and see if the game's popular in terms of followers. And then I also look at I go on the top wish listed games on Steam. The first 100 of those are pretty much going to be anywhere upwards of 50,000 wish lists are up. And then the closer you get to the top, like 50, the top 30 or so is going to be like 100 to 1,000 or up. So I look at like similar things in my genre and able to, cross-reference that. But there's no 100% easy way to do it. But yeah, that's the way I would do it.
All right, so we're down to one of our last questions here. If you've got a question, do me a solid, because Dan's in a meeting now and he's not like monitoring Discord as well as I am. Drop it in the video chat. But I am watching the other ones. So from Lee, what are your thoughts on early access? Does it differ when the devs are releasing with or without a publisher?
I liked Lee's podcast the other day, by the way. I watched it. For me, I mean, I have complicated thoughts on early access now. I think it does differ. So the data suggests that releasing in early access with a publisher is going to net you more sales on average than releasing without a publisher across the board. How much by? It's difficult to say. But across the board, it tends to be, if you release with a publisher on early access, you're going to sell more. I think that comes down to a couple of different things. One, I think there's a little bit more, maybe there's a little bit more of confidence in the product because there's a publisher involved. But for me, overall, the data also suggests that early access across the board is declining in both success and value. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So, I mean, I've still launched games this year, even that have been very, very successful in early access, like sold large amounts of copies. But I think Steam involved and have inherently made early access a little bit harder. And it's also been a decline in perception across the board from the average consumer, because there's been a lot of early access games that have spent too long in early access or have been abandoned, whatever it may be. There's also the situation where the Steam rules now say that you cannot you're launching early access, you can do a discount, but once you're out of if you leave early access and increase your price, you cannot do a discount. So you can't do a discount for your full launch. The only way to actually do it now is to increase your price more than 30 days before that you leave early access. And so you have to increase your price during early access, because you cannot increase your price and have a discount within the same time period.
Wow.
There's also, I don't know, because they say so. That's why. Because the mass, that's what they do. They just decide things, and that's that. There's also the situation where early access games on launch don't now show up on the new and trending tab on the front page of Steam.
Oh,
that's also a massive game discovery issue that has occurred with early access. One of the reasons that one of our games did so well this last year in early access is because we managed to get the game popular enough beforehand and sold enough copies where it actually hit the top sellers list, and then was given its own large banner because it was so popular. And that's the only way we got front page placement on Steam for an early access launch. So there's a lot of barriers to entry with that now. And so, yeah, I mean, early access is inherently not, for me at least from what I've seen, especially over the last 12, 18 months, it's not as inherently as attractive for developers as it once was. I think, and also the issue is when it comes to wishlist conversion as well, like if you're planning to be in early access for a long period of time, all those wish lists that you get at that early access launch might not convert by the time you get there, especially if your game is like 12 months old. Your early access period is 12 months or longer. The best early accesses I've seen usually run like less than 6 months. And that way those wish lists are pretty relevant and fresh. So, yeah, I mean, it's tough. Like, I mean, there's so many elements to everything. What it really takes for commercial games to it takes everything. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, it's
what it really takes for commercial game success. It takes everything.
I mean, but I mean, it's kind of true. I mean, the reality is you have to look at everything. You can't just focus on one thing and then hope that one thing takes you there. You have to plan like you would any other business and be like, okay, we have to look at everything and execute this correctly. It doesn't mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that everything has to go right, because it won't. It just won't, right? But you have to allow for the ability for something to go really well, right? And so it takes it does take everything. But when you do everything right, or at least try to do everything right, then it's better than not doing a bunch of stuff and then hoping that everything goes right.
Yes, but you have to do marketing. All right. I think that's actually all of the questions that we got through. That's amazing. And it only took us an hour and a half. As always, I mean, Michael's in our Discord. So if you've got more questions and you want to pile on, more and more, it's Friday afternoon. We're tuned out and doing some work, and we're also doing things like this. So ask your questions. Seriously, there's no dumb questions. I mean, everybody needs to know this. Guarantee you there's nobody on our Discord that's going to ask a question that at least somebody out of the almost 5,000 people in there don't have that same question. So always be willing to ask. On the Indie Game Business announcements, our next event is coming up March 8th and March 9th. So get a head start on your GDC stuff. You can go to our website, indiegame.business. I fixed indiegame.business.com, so it actually points to the right place now. And I didn't realize I owned that, but I do apparently. Go there. The tickets to watch sessions and all that stuff is always free, 100%. Tickets to do meetings for publishers and marketing firms and investors are $50. Use friend of IGB for a discount. And if it's still out of your pay range, that is perfectly fine. DM me. I will hook you up with a pass, because that's why we do this. Michael, what do you want to plug other than obviously your wonderful PR agency?
Yeah, just that. If you want PR or influencer marketing, or digital advertising, then come and have a conversation with me, and we can hopefully we'll be able to help. I might tell you no as well, though. So at least I'll give you an honest. There's one thing you can guarantee. I'll give you an honest opinion. At least I'll say no, this isn't going to work, and then you don't have to spend a bunch of money and then someone tell you that it's not going to work after the fact, right? So
and if you have a wonderful idea but you can't afford a PR agency, talk to Michael and and we may be able to find you some money. So yeah, that's it. Next week, we have another wonderful speaker coming up who I don't know who it is off the top of my head, but we'll get there. But for the sake, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Sounds good.
Bye.